Now hear these words as written in 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 2 and 6 through 14 in the Common English translation. Now the Lord was going to take Elijah up to heaven in a windstorm, and Elijah and Elisha were leaving Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, because the Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you live, I won't leave you." So they went down to Bethel. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, because the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you live, I won't leave you." So both of them went out together. 50 members from the group of prophets also went along, but they stood at a distance. Both Elijah and Elisha stood there beside the Jordan River. Elijah then took his coat, rolled it up, and hit the water. The water was divided in two. Both of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "What do you want me to do for you before I'm taken away from you?" Elisha said, "Let me have twice your spirit." Elijah said, "You have made a difficult request. If you can see me when I'm taken from you, then it will be yours. If you don't see me, it won't happen." They were walking along talking, when suddenly a fiery chariot and fiery horses appeared and separated the two of them. Then Elijah went to heaven in the windstorm. Elisha was watching, and he cried out, "Oh, my father, Israel's chariots and its riders." When he could no longer see him, Elisha took hold of his clothes and ripped them in two. Then Elisha picked up the coat that had fallen from Elijah. He went back and stood beside the banks of the Jordan River. He took the coat that had fallen from Elijah and hit the water, and he said, "Where is the Lord, Elijah's God?" And when he hit the water, it divided into two. Then Elisha crossed over. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Let us hear the story as written in Galatians chapter 5, verses 1, then 13 through 25, as written in the Message translation. Christ has set us free to live a free life. So take your stand. Never again let anyone put a harness of slavery on you. It is absolutely clear that God has called you to a free life. Just make sure that you don't use this freedom as an excuse to do whatever you want to do and destroy your freedom. Rather, use your freedom to serve one another in love. That's how freedom grows. For everything we know about God's Word is summed up in a single sentence. Love others as you love yourself. That's an act of true freedom. If you bite and ravage each other, watch out. In no time at all, you will be annihilating each other, and where will your precious freedom be then? My counsel is this: live freely, animated, and motivated by God's Spirit. Then you won't feed the compulsions of selfishness, for there is a root of sinful self-interest in us that is at odds with a free spirit, just as a free spirit is incompatible with selfishness. These two ways of life are contrary to each other, so that you cannot live at times one way and at times another way, according to how you feel on any given day. Why don't you choose to be led by the Spirit, and so escape the erratic compulsions of a law-dominated existence? It is obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. repetitive, loveless, cheap sex, a stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage, frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness, trinket gods, magic show religion, paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming, yet never satisfied, wants a brutal temper, an impotence to love or to be loved, divided homes and divided lives, small-minded and lopsided pursuits, a vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community. I could go on. This isn't the first time I've warned you, you know. If you use your freedom this way, you will not inherit God's kingdom. But what happens when we live God's way? He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments and not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and to direct our energies wisely. Legalism is helpless in bringing this about. It only gets in the way. Among those who belong to Christ, everything connected with getting our own way and mindlessness responding to what everyone else calls necessities is killed off for good, crucified. Since this is the kind of life we've chosen, the life of the Spirit, let us make sure that we do not just hold it as an idea in our heads or a sentiment in our hearts, but work out its implications in every detail of our lives. That means we will not compare ourselves with each other as if one of us was better and another worse. We have far more interesting things to do with our lives. Each of us is an original.
Thank you, Mary. You gotta love the message sometimes. It just cuts to the chase, doesn't it? As we continue on in this summer focus on the lectionary text, including texts that aren't the gospel. Thank you, Seth Waters. That was his idea in one of our Monday morning worship planning sessions. We're continuing on with 2 Kings and Galatians, as you just heard, read so beautifully by Mary. Now, I want to just bring you up to speed a little bit with 2 Kings. Some of these stories are just so fun, and sometimes, I remember one year we did a whole sermon series on Genesis, and I went into it kicking and screaming. I didn't really want to do a whole sermon series on Genesis, but then it ended up to be so much fun. Well, at least I thought it was fun. I don't know if everyone thinks this is fun, but I thought it was fun. I feel the same way about some of our Old Testament texts that sometimes we go into kicking and screaming, saying, what does this even mean? How do we even connect to it? And yet, there we are, right? And this continues from last week when we were in 1 Kings chapter 19, and we heard about Elijah. He had taken down all the prophets of Baal. I can never say it. Baal. Thank you, Baal. And then he got a threat by Queen Jezebel and ran scared, right? He ran scared into the cave. He spent 40 days resting, getting nourishment. And God called to him in that still, soft voice, right? That small voice. And God gave him 3 things to do. Anoint King Hazael, the king of Aram, anoint Jehu, king of Israel, and anoint Elijah, a prophet, his successor. And what's interesting is as we read through, if we continued on into the reading that we didn't do, so I'm going to talk a couple of minutes about 1 Kings chapter 19 to 2 Kings chapter 2 and what was in the middle there. Elijah went and he did anoint or bring about Elijah, as we just heard, Elisha, as his successor. But he actually didn't do the anointing of the kings as God had instructed him to do. Elijah does that later. And it's interesting because even though Elijah didn't continue all of what God had told him to do, Elijah is still considered faithful. He was one of our greats, one of the great prophets of our tradition, still respected, well respected and loved. He did great things, but he didn't do everything. We got to see his very human side. So moving very quickly into what happened in chapter 20, Elijah wasn't in chapter 20 a lot. We move into 1 Kings 21, and Ahab and Jezebel steal land and have Naboth killed from Naboth's vineyard. Elijah confronts Ahab that judgment is coming, and Ahab repents, and then God delays punishment for a little while. And in that, Elijah is speaking boldly, and it also calls out that even wicked kings like Ahab can move God's heart. And then we go into 1 Kings 22, where Ahab passes on and he dies in battle, and then his son Ahaziah becomes king. And then in 2 Kings chapter 1, we hear all about King Ahaziah and his idolatry, and he's in conversation with Elijah, and Elijah is saying, is there no God in Israel? And Elijah again calls down fire like he did in chapter 18 of 1 Kings, and there's this dramatic confrontation with soldiers, and then we see that, Elijah is still confronting everyone with fire. Elijah is still doing what Elijah does. It leads us to today, and we meet at this turning point. Elisha hears a message from God that says, Elijah's going away today. Well, there you go. What a great way to start your day. Guess what? This is going to happen. And Elisha, scared to death, won't leave Elijah's side. So they move on. And understanding that time is ending, his time with his mentor, he considered him like a father. He wanted to be like his son. His time with him was ending. He wouldn't leave his side. He asked his father for what a first son would receive in inheritance, a second portion. And you heard what Elijah said about that when Mary was reading that. Well, if you watch me being taken up, if you watch me in this moment, then you will have that. And we experience Elijah taking his mantle and parting the river, and then Elisha watches the whole thing happen, tears at his clothes because he's so just filled with grief. And then he moves on as the mantle is passed to him. And Elijah too brings down the mantle and parts that river. It's an amazing story, one that's really hard for us to connect to. We don't really see people parting rivers with mantles. But we do know what it's like to have a mentor, many of us. We do know what it's like to be called into things that maybe we don't feel ready for, or maybe we just not sure what to do. We know what it feels like to lose someone that we love. We know what it feels like to feel that grief that makes you want to tear at your clothing. And so here we are at that moment. That River Jordan that has so much symbolism for us in our traditions, right? And today, it's like it becomes a threshold, doesn't it? A threshold, a place between what was and what is yet to come. And so I think our question for today is, are we ready to cross into what God is calling us into? What rivers maybe are standing in our way that we need to cross? What thresholds do we need to cross to step into the next phase of our journey of life and faith, to continue on in our purpose, to continue on in our lives in really meaningful ways. I don't know if you all connected with that song that Seth chose today as the reflecting song, The Summons, but man, I really connect to that song. That was a song that I had at my ordination. That is the song that I feel like is such a part of my experience of being called over to cross the river, I guess I would say. That part that says, will you love the you hide? Will you love the you hide from all others? What thresholds do we need to cross? I feel like it's that word freedom that connects Paul's letter to the Galatians to this text from 2 Kings. Another one of my favorites. Today we're just hitting some of my favorites. Really, it's the fruit of the Spirit piece. What the fruit of the Spirit looks like. But in Galatians 5, he's writing, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Not freedom to serve ourselves, no, but freedom to love. Freedom to build community. Freedom to live by the Spirit rather than impulses of fear, pride, or division. And right now in our communities, it's tough to hang on to that freedom because we are being driven to division like no other time, aren't we? When Paul speaks of the flesh in this segment, think of it as an ego-driven impulse, the existence of passion and desires of relentless self-promotion and self-interest. It's a service to self above all others kind of mentality. Service to self. That's what Paul is really focusing on here to move us from. And the list there that Mary brought us through of all the debauchery, all the different things, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's the idea, right? The idea of what it looks like, what life can look like when we are living more with our own egos on high. That's what life can look like. And then, though, Paul paints this picture of what life can look like, what freedom can look like. And he calls it the fruit of the Spirit. It's not a list of commands. That's the difference here, you guys. It's not about like, well, if you're just good, if you come and sit in your pew and you're good and you just choose to be a good person, then X, Y, Z. That's not it at all. That's backwards. It's that when you move out of the noise, and I feel like there's so much noise, that's the only way I can describe it. When I move out of the noise, when I moved out of the noise, when I became a pastor, when I chose to follow the summons instead of running from God, which is what I did for most of my life, because I didn't love the me I hid from others. When I chose to finally follow, it was like the noise just didn't permeate as much anymore. The restlessness that I was feeling, chasing those ego-centered kind of things, just left me. Not because I chose to be a good person and do the right thing and be whatever. Not because I was law-abiding. Because I opened up enough to let the Spirit in. One unsteady foot across that river at a time. I was really scared. Really scared. Because there's a vulnerability in that, isn't there? When you really open up your life and rely on God and stop listening to all the noise in this world that will tell you that you're not good enough anyway, because there's always someone there to compare you to themselves, to try to make themselves feel better by putting their elbow on top of your shoulder to hold you down. When you stop listening to all that crap, none of that really matters. And I just lost my notes because I just went on a tangent. because I'm pretty passionate about this part. It's not about choosing to be good. It's about opening your heart in such a way that you start to see things differently. You start to see yourself differently. It isn't about believing in God or everything that Jesus did or the right doctrine. It's about believing that you are actually God's beloved, just as you are, that you are good enough. That's what it is. And Paul is painting that picture for us. And sometimes people just get it backwards. So you've probably all been in those churches that tell you stop being such a horrible sinner and sinners this, sinners that, and blah, blah, blah about doing the wrong thing. No. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, I'm loved. I'm going to be okay. So Paul paints this picture of what freedom is going to look like. The fruit of the Spirit. For me, it's the yardstick of everything I see in the world. If I'm trying something that's not going so well, I'm like, is this a Patty thing or a God thing? Because if I'm not seeing the fruit of the Spirit in it, then maybe that's just not really God's call, but Patty's egotistical desires. I still have them. It's not like they're all gone. We're all human, right? But Paul paints this picture. Again, not an exhaustive list. This isn't the only part of what the fruit of the Spirit looks like. But he paints this picture, and I want to just slow down for a minute so we really hear it. Love. We talk about love a lot, don't we? It's not just nice, warm feelings or passion. It's a commitment to the good of other people and to the good of yourself. Joy. A deep, enduring gladness that isn't dependent upon circumstances. Peace. Not just the absence of conflict. I wish we could say that we will live at a time where there's an absence of conflict. I don't know that will happen. But it's a sense of harmony within and around us. It's that peace of Christ that passes all understanding. It's that little glimmer of light that shines when days are really dark. Peace, hope. You know the light. At least I really hope and pray you all know the light. Patience. Hi, my name is Patty, and I really struggle with patience. The willingness to wait, to trust, to remain grounded even when life doesn't go at the pace we want it to go, and usually I want it to go pretty fast. Remember, I have this ADHD mind. My mind is racing. That's why I fidget all the time. Slow it down. I'll never forget one of my most meaningful prayer times. Just praying, breath prayer, in and out on the word hope, 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 hope. And that word turned to trust. And that word was a word from God for me. Trust. Give it time, Patty. Give it time. Kindness. Choosing gentleness over harshness, generosity over indifference. The world needs a whole lot more kindness right now. Generosity, often translated as goodness. Living open-handedly, sharing what we have. And don't go telling people I'm a socialist. Maybe I am, I don't know. But geez, we talk about sharing, and in this generation right now that we get into, well, I'm sorry, I digress. Faithfulness. Being trustworthy, grounded, committed, even when it's hard, but I would say especially when it's hard. Showing up. One of my own favorite sermons, of my own, was one that I shared a message a little while ago from the Festival of Homiletics when I was talking about what faith really is and belief, the difference between faith and belief. I don't care what dogma you believe in. What does it look like every day in your life, in my life? What kind of life are we living? How are we living in a way that we follow the teachings of Jesus in a way that people can't help but see it? That's hard work. Ooh, that's hard work. But that's faith to me. And I'm open to your thoughts too. You might have different ones. Gentleness. Strength under control, compassion that doesn't need to dominate. Self-control. The ability to respond rather than react. To act with intention rather than impulse. I was with a friend this weekend, and she started wearing a heart monitor, and right here. And it was like a big rectangular device under her shirt. Talk about impulse. I reached out and touched it. I'm like, what am I doing? Why did I do that? I just wanted to touch it. Anyone else ever do these kind of things? Like you act on impulse. Maybe your impulse is like I just did. And she's like, well, you just pressed the button. I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? I'm so sorry. I just acted on impulse, right? Maybe you have verbal impulse. I have that too sometimes. Oh gosh. Have it ever just popped out and you're like, oh, so sorry about that. So very sorry about that, right? Whew. Keeping that impulse in can be really tough sometimes. But these are things, these fruits of the Spirit. Add more, right? I would advise you, like, I look at the list and I think about those, like some days, some are easier than others. It's not a like, I feel like this journey of faith and this fruit of the Spirit, it's not like a constant flow forward. I think sometimes it's a flow a little back and forth. I think sometimes we take little diversions on the side. I think it's kind of a loopy road, It's not always a straight line. We're not always going to get it right? There's going to be days. It's all right. Go back to Elijah. He didn't follow all that God told him to do. He went and hid in a cave, remember? God didn't give up on him. And if God didn't give up on him having to do all those major things, I don't think God's given up on us either. These aren't things that we do alone. They are the fruit, the natural result of walking closely with God. And like fruit, though, they'll grow more and more over time, slowly, quietly, often without fanfare. So Elisha had to cross that river into the next season of his life. He had to move from following to leading, from observing to acting. That river represented the boundary between the familiar and the unknown, and he stepped forward in trust. We too stand at our own rivers. The thresholds of faith, growth, and change. God invites us to just not stay put in safety, right? Like they say, the safest place for a ship is in the harbor, but we know ships aren't built to stay in the harbor, right? We're built to move forward too, to walk by the Spirit and bear the fruit that reflects Jesus in our lives. So I just want to leave you with the thoughts. I probably just left you with a lot of thoughts. But what river is God inviting you to cross right now? What mantle might be being passed to you in your family, in your community, maybe in this church? What fruit is the Spirit longing to cultivate in your life? Maybe it's time to step more fully into love, even when it's really, really hard. Maybe the Spirit is cultivating patience in a season that feels really slow. Maybe it's gentleness in a world that often values being right more than being kind. Maybe it's self-control, learning to listen more, to really listen, to speak less, and to act with care. Wherever God is calling you, I believe the Spirit's already at work. Elisha picked up the mantle, crossed back over that river, not to return to what was, but to step into his new being, to step into what was becoming. And you know, we can do this too. So may we listen for God's call, that still small voice. We couldn't have cued those rumbling mufflers on those Harleys any better right there, right? For those of you at home, there's Harleys going by right now. May we find the courage to step forward and cross the river. And may we live lives that bear fruit, that nourish others, that bless the world, honor the Spirit, and love our neighbors as ourselves. And know that we're never alone. May it be so, my friends. Amen.